Well, with that, I am Elliott Church. I am the chair of the International Law section. I'm only the chair of this section for another week or so, when I will be turning over that responsibility to Reinhard Lemke, who is the chair-elect. And so henceforth, you'll be receiving notices about things ILS is doing from Reinhard. But it's my pleasure today to kick off this event that has to do with careers in international law in the private sector. It is the second of a two-part series. Last week, we discussed careers in international law in the public sector. And if you weren't present for that, you have the opportunity to view the recording. So Thomas Geib, who is on the call with us today, is recording this one and recorded that one as well. So if you're interested in what's happening in international law at the UN, at the US State Department, and in an interesting nonprofit called Earthrights, please view that. As well, please know that if you have to cut out early today for scheduling necessities, you can see the rest of this presentation on the ILS YouTube channel. Questions. Greg, I think you will discuss how we'll handle questions, and I'll leave that to you. I will simply note that this program will come to a formal close at 1 p.m. However, interesting programs like this often run over their allotted time, and I expect this one will too. Anyone who has to go at 1, please feel free to do so. But anyone who wants to continue the discussion, please feel free to stay. And I will stay for as long as 15 minutes after our allotted time, and we can continue the discussion with those who are here. With that, I will turn it over to, well, before I turn it over to her, let me introduce Liz Storm. So Liz Storm is a council member with the International Law section. She practices both in the area of international law and technology law. And it is due to Liz that we've had some of the most interesting programs we've had this year. In particular, Liz organized a two-part series on music, cross-border music licensing, which is an interesting area of commerce because it involves a lot of terminology that we're not used to and industry practices that a lot of people outside the music industry are not familiar with. But a lot of money changes hands between countries related to music, and that's one aspect of private sector international law. So Liz did a great job organizing that program, and in fact that was recorded too. And if you go to the ILS YouTube channel, and Liz, perhaps you could distribute a link to that to the attendees after this, you'll be able to see that program and all the others that we've broadcast this year during this period of COVID. With that, I will turn it over to Liz for a few comments about one of the reasons that we are hosting this program, and also to introduce our moderator. Liz?
Sure, thank you, Elliott, and Neil Welke, who I think is going to be on here, and everybody who's helped put this together today, and all of you for joining us today. We have a great slate of panelists today, so I don't want to spend too much time going over the mentor program for the State Bar of Michigan International Law section. But the work that we've done this year has brought a great opportunity for networking in a new way. And we are seeking section members to join the mentor program for further programming and to sign up to participate as a mentor or as a mentee. We will be sending out a link to all of you who registered today on how to sign up at the State Bar of Michigan Mentoring Center and how to select whether you want to be a mentor or a mentee with this section. We will send a link out about the recording today, as Elliott mentioned, and we are partnering with the international law departments in the law schools and colleges in the state, and appreciate Wayne State University Law School, Western Michigan University Cooley Law School, Detroit Mercy Law School, and Michigan State University College of Law for participating, and in the future, providing academic liaisons to the committee and the mentoring process. It wouldn't be possible without the law schools and the support to this program. So I appreciate all of your involvement, especially Professor Greg Fox, whose brainchild this is, and for which we thank for moderating the panel today and last week. Without further ado, Professor Greg Fox is the director of the Program for International Legal Studies at Wayne State Law School. He's on the committee for the mentor program with the International Law section that brings us all here today. I will try to give a brief summary of his background, but encourage you to read his articles, book, and research. Professor Fox began his career in litigation at Hale and Dorr, now Wilmer Hale in Boston, and participated in early cases under the Alien Tort Statute. He has participated in international cases and was co-counsel to the state of Eritrea, which is, I guess, the British pronunciation. I hope I did that well, in the Zugar-Hanish Islands, arbitration with the Republic of Yemen, and represented several cases there. He was the co-director of the Center for International Studies at New York University Law School and also served as a law clerk to the Honorable Alan H. Nevis of the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut. He has a great background for providing moderation to both panels, and we really appreciate his doing so today. Professor Fox has been a visiting fellow at Cambridge University and a visiting professor in Mexico City. He is the recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Social Science Research Council Fellowship in International Peace and Security. He has published several works, and his article, The Right to Political Participation in International Law, in the Yale Journal, continues to be cited several times. Professor Fox teaches international law at Wayne State Law School, and we appreciate his time today. Professor Fox, thank you again for moderating. And with that, I'll pass the camera or the mic over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Liz, and thanks to you, Elliott, and for everybody else who's made this possible. For those of you on Zoom, let me explain why I why I look different from everyone else participating. I'm actually here live in an auditorium at Wayne State. You can't see the many law students who are sitting here, but we do have a live audience. And so this is a kind of hybrid event. Well, I'm very excited about the panel today. As Elliott mentioned, last week we had a discussion of careers in public international law, and now we're moving over to the private sector. I'm only going to very briefly introduce the panelists because I think much of their discussion is going to be telling you about themselves, and they can do that much better than I can. Each panelist will speak for 10 to 12 minutes or so, and after that, we will open it up to questions. If you are on the Zoom, please indicate in the chat that you would like to ask a question, and when you do that, if you could make sure that that chat message either goes to me directly or goes to everybody on the chat. If it goes to some other combination of people but not me, I won't be able to see it and acknowledge your question. There'll also be an opportunity for the folks live here at Wayne to ask questions, and hopefully you'll be able to hear that through the PA system. So our panelists today are Chris Giles, who will be speaking first, who's an attorney with Culhane, Meadows, Haughian, and Walsh. He will be followed by Lerman, who's a senior international trade specialist with the U.S. Commerce Service. And finally, Bruce Thelen, who is an international trade attorney with Dickinson, Wright here in Detroit. So I am going to turn it over to our panelists and start with Chris.
Great, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Elliott and Liz, for inviting me to participate in this panel. And thanks to Bruce and Eve, my fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, очень приятно с вами познакомиться. Дуже приемно с вами познакомиться. Enchanté. Freut mich, Sie kennenzulernen. So nice to meet you all in each of the languages that I use professionally and have for the last 20 years or so. That's Russian, Ukrainian, French, and German. My name is Christopher Giles. I didn't take the traditional path to becoming a lawyer. I graduated from Michigan State University College of Law in 2002 with a concentration in international law at the age of 37. So I didn't go right into law school after the university. I really loved my time in Michigan. I rented a cottage in Portland and commuted to East Lansing every day, 45 minutes each way. I really haven't been there in a while. That's my Michigan connection. Currently, I'm a partner at Culhane Meadows, PLLC. We are the largest women-owned full-service business law firm in the country. I'm in the international practice group, and I am a member of the New York primarily, and also Boston and DC offices. And I'm in the international practice group. I'm admitted to practice in New York and Massachusetts. My practice consists of cross-border transactions, immigration law, which is the bulk of my work today, but also general corporate and real estate and M&A. As I said, I didn't go to law school right away. I studied Russian at Georgetown during the Cold War. I was in Washington during the Reagan-Gorbachev summits and the later the Bush-Gorbachev summits. It was the era of glasnost and perestroika. And as a young student, I knew I wanted to do something with respect to the warming in US-Soviet relations, but I didn't know exactly what. After college, I went out to Monterey and I studied at the the Monterey Institute of International Studies. Now it's the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey to train as a translator. Of course, in my last semester in college, the Berlin Wall came down. During my graduate studies, the Soviet Union collapsed, so I had to kind of adjust my sails professionally. And after finishing, basically my Cold War education and training became obsolete. So I landed in Manhattan working for a law firm that had a large Russian-speaking clientele. At the time, there was a large influx of Russian-speaking people from the former Soviet Union immigrating to the United States, and they needed help. They needed services. And so my career really in international law began prior to going to law school and becoming a lawyer. I went on to, as I said, Michigan State, where I got my JD. It was a no-brainer that I would have a concentration in international law. Based on my experience and my passion. My passion was languages, and I knew I wanted to do international law. As part of my concentration in international law at Michigan State, I was able to take part in the joint program in Oxford on international human rights law that was put on by George Washington University School of Law. And I was able to get 5 credits in the summer of 2000 applied to my concentration in international law. At MSU, I still took EU, of course, in the EU, international criminal law. It's basically electives in any area of criminal or international law that was offered at the time. So I'd strongly recommend, if you have the chance to study abroad during law school, take advantage of it either through your own school or if you can get transfer credit like I did. I think that would be a really good opportunity because studying and traveling abroad and later working abroad, I'll get to my time in Ukraine, where I spent 7 years as an expat lawyer. Just a real eye opener, and it was a way for me to see how I could help people and make an impact using my languages and legal training to help people. For example, move personnel across borders, set up an office overseas, navigate the sanctions laws today, which is very important, of course. After MSU, I got an LLM in International Human Rights Law at Notre Dame. Liz and I crossed paths both at MSU Law and Notre Dame. So thanks again, Liz, for inviting me to take part in this. After law school, I got the opportunity to live and work as an expat lawyer in Ukraine, in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine. And first with a human rights NGO, and then subsequently with some Ukrainian business law firms. I was the only foreign lawyer, only native speaker of English in those firms. So as a consequence, I got exposed to many different facets of international law. It was really a trilingual job. So it was really up my alley as far as my passion for languages and foreign cultures. The official documents were all in Ukrainian, the state language of Ukraine. I communicated with my colleagues in Russian, and the international conference calls, pleadings, documents were in English. So I was exposed to such things as cross-border transactions, investment dispute arbitration, syndicated loans, loans from the EBRD and IFC, legal opinions and transactions, due diligence reports, and project finance. So I would work with teams of Ukrainian lawyers, and I would use my language skills and legal training to put together due diligence reports on Ukrainian targets being acquired by Western entities. And basically, I consist of gathering the data in Russian, Ukrainian, American English, British English, and my task was to create a cohesive British English due diligence report. So that was a way for me to use my linguistic skills and legal skills. And I really enjoyed that. I was also involved in investment dispute arbitration before ad hoc tribunals of ICSID, the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, as well as the Arbitration Institute of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce. So that's really a brief summary. I touched upon different areas that I did. Today at Culhane Meadows, the bulk of my work today is immigration law and all the COVID-related issues, and the problem with the Canada border and the cessation of non-essential traffic. So there's really no formula for the students and the new attorneys. There's really no formula. This was my path, and we each have our own journey. Just find out what your passion is. For me, that was, in addition to my study abroad, I traveled a lot globally, and I lived and worked in Ukraine for 7 years, which was a really great experience as an international lawyer. At Culhane Meadows, I have over 70 partners with a vast experience in IP and technology and corporate cross-border transactions that I can collectively with them make a bigger impact and help people more. Individuals need visas, companies need to transfer personnel across borders. So I found a way to pair my language skills and passion with helping people in the law, because the law is really about helping people. So I'll close with specific recommendations for law students and new attorneys. If your school offers a concentration in international law, I strongly recommend that you do that. If there's an opportunity to study abroad through your own school or can get transfer credit from another school's program, I would recommend that as well. Like you're doing today, I get involved with bar associations. Early in my career, I joined the ABA section of international law, in particular the Russia-Eurasia Committee. And it's all about networking, communicating, making relationships. So the first several years of my career, I was very active in that body and met a lot of people, met a lot of mentors, and we still are in touch today. Also, there's the International Bar Association. If you're still a student, you can explore the opportunities that those bar associations offer with respect to students and get active that way. And besides bar associations, consider trade organizations. The organizations I'm involved with today are the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, the Ukrainian Institute in London, the Ukrainian Institute in New York, the European American Chamber of Commerce in New York, the International Business Structuring Association, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the New York City Bar. And finally, I would recommend becoming professionally proficient in at least one form of language that suits your goals and interest and passion. You don't have to really take a class today. There are many apps that you can pick up a language and essential phrases, and I would strongly recommend that. So I'd be happy to go into further detail during the Q&A session, Greg. So with that, I'll give it back to you. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. I will now turn it over to Eve Lerman. Eve, I think you might still be muted. sorry, we can't hear you. Yeah, now you're definitely muted.
It looks to me like Eve is reconnecting.
Yeah.
That may resolve her problem. We could hear her before when she first signed on. Let's see if by reconnecting, she is able to get her sound to work. Greg, do you want to do things perhaps in a different order, given Eve's
Sure, Bruce. If you're
technical difficulties?
would you mind pinch hitting?
No, that's fine, Greg. Not a problem at all. Well, I think from Chris's presentation, when you when we hear from Eve, you're going to realize that there's no 5 easy steps to international practice or an international career. There's a lot of different paths that you might take. I'm a partner at Dickinson, Wright, as Greg mentioned, which is a firm of almost 500 lawyers, but we have only one office outside the United States, that's in Toronto. My work, I often describe it as being international general counsel for clients, and I work mainly with US companies that are doing business outside the United States. And I think if I look back, I've done projects on every continent except for Antarctica, and I'm still waiting for that call to come in. So if you know anybody in Antarctica that needs some legal work, have them give me a ring. But in any event, when I say the international life cycle, that is the pattern and the term I use to describe what I have seen with my clients. It's typically a first stage of a life cycle of a company that's expanding internationally is going to be an export sale. That may be followed by setting up this, it could be just an order that comes in on the internet. The order gets filled and the client says, hey, that was great, we got paid. Maybe we'd like to do more of it. That may lead to setting up sales representatives, distributors in other countries, maybe at some point licensing technology or subcontracting production of the product outside the United States, because there may be trade barriers, there may be currency exchange issues, transportation costs, customs duties. There's a variety of reasons that might be done. And sometimes it's just a need to be closer to customers. So that could lead to perhaps a joint venture in another country or an overseas subsidiary with full-blown, capacity to produce R&D and the whole thing. But along the course of this, what I call the international life cycle, there's going to be a lot of different legal issues. I'll just take one, for example, with an export. The first thing I ask a client when they're talking about selling their product outside the United States is, do you have your trademark registered in that country? Why do I say that? Well, there are these people, I refer to them as trademark pirates, who will maybe go to a trade show, or they will look for evidence that a product may be coming into their market, fill out the trademark application form, file it, doesn't cost that much. And then when the client goes to import the product into that market, they can block it, or at least they can block it using that trademark. So that can result in a need to negotiate with a trademark, this trademark pirate to get the trademark rights back. But that's just one example. But as you go through this whole life cycle and transactional course, you'll find there's a whole lot of issues that come up. These days, international trade is a whole lot more important just because we have global supply chains. We see all kinds of problems that have developed because of that. We've got issues as well with China 301 tariffs, Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. We have the new USMCA. Then there are things like forced labor. I'm working with clients in the apparel sector who are producing product in China and now need to prove in effect that that product is not produced with forced labor, and none of the components of the product are produced with forced labor in China. So there's new challenges and new changes all the time. I began my practice in New York after Michigan Law School. with a Wall Street firm. At the time, it was one of the largest in the world, with 200 lawyers. Yeah, there's now firms with 2,000 lawyers, but it was rather intimate by comparison. But what passed for international in those days was maybe a sales office in New Jersey by a Japanese company. It just was a much, much different world than we have today. I spent 3 years there. And as I looked at my senior colleagues and saw them moving to New Jersey and Connecticut and commuting on trains every day, I decided that really wasn't the way I wanted to spend my career. And so I decided I was going to come to Michigan, my home state, and see what opportunities were here. Now, before I did that, I said, I'm going to take a little trip, go to Paris, spend a month, just, put my feet up. One thing led to another. And I wound up taking a trip around the world and getting back to Michigan almost a year later. I'd blown my life savings, ran my credit card up to the limit, and hired by Dickinson, Wright at that point. But while I was in Paris, I did travel to the Soviet Union. It was, in the years of the Cold War. In fact, it was right after Jimmy Carter had announced that we would be boycotting the Moscow Olympics. But I went on a subsidized tour with a French communist group. It was very economical and quite interesting for a couple of weeks. While I was in Paris, though, I got a letter from the guy that I shared an office with in New York. His interest was public international law. That was last year's topic. But he said, hey, it's amazing. He had done a law school thesis on the way the U.S. would have reestablished relationships with China. His theory was that it required congressional consent. Senator Goldwater, after President Carter announced he was just going to go ahead and do it on his own, sued President Carter. And our little law office where my office mate sat became the focal point of Senator Goldwater's lawyers, because he had, at the urging of his law school professor, who told him this is a very current issue, you should get it published. He did. He got it published in the Harvard International Law Journal. It was the only authority on the issue at the time of this lawsuit. But anyway, that led to him getting to give you an idea of career paths, a very prominent international firm offered him a job in Singapore. He came back after the interview to the office. He said, I'm going to go. I've never been to Asia in my life. I'll probably live above a Chinese restaurant, but it'll be interesting. I got a letter from him in Paris. He said, well, actually the firm has an office, has a house that's provided as part of the office by the Singapore government. And I got a maid, a gardener, a pool. And if you want to come and hang out, please feel free to do so. Well, I did it, used it as my base to go around Asia, including going to China, which really had just opened up to foreign tourists at the time. You had to travel with the China Travel Service. I did that, but I got into the country that way. But like many of the other people in our group that had all coalesced in Hong Kong, the doctors wanted to see the hospitals, the teachers wanted to see the schools. I wanted to see the courts. It made our tour guides cry, frankly. I mean, they were just throwing up their hands at this. But I skipped most of the group tours and usually went out on my own just to see what was happening in these places. In Hangzhou, by the way, I walked out of the hotel and a young man came up to me and said, Mr. I'd like to give you a tour of my city and practice my English. I said, great, let's go. Spent a half a day with him. He told me his name was Jack. We walked around town. And I told the story 100 times about this very enterprising young man and how I was sure that if there were more people like that, China's economy was going to take off. Well, I read an article in Inc. magazine. It was an interview with Jack Ma. He said the very first thing I did as a teenager was get on my bike and I rode to the tourist hotel and I gave tourists, tours of my city to practice my English. And I said, okay, I know this guy. And he was here in Detroit, actually, back in 2017, a big event to drum up some business. He was looking for companies, and medium-sized companies here in Michigan and in the United States that would use his Alibaba platform for purposes of promoting their products. We had a little reunion. If you Google my name and Jack Ma, you'll probably find some of the news reports that were in the China papers and the Hong Kong papers and elsewhere about our visit. Well, anyway, he invited me back. I went back on the way to Australia for a meeting and had a very nice visit. He was not there, but I had a nice tour of Alibaba's facilities and things that obviously changed a whole lot in the time since I had seen him there first. But I arrived back in Detroit and I had, took a job at Dickinson. I had no expectation of doing international work. It just wasn't anything I expected. But very soon after I arrived, I was pulled into a project for Detroit Bank after a Mexican peso crisis and did a whole bunch of Mexican debt restructurings. So sometimes people ask me, how did I get involved in international? Well, it was kind of unusual, then in 1981, 40 years ago, for anybody to have traveled around the world. I had done that. And my joke, although there's some truth to it, was that somebody called at the switchboard with a foreign accent that the switchboard operator couldn't understand. They just sent me the call. And one of those calls was a French firm, an auto company, that built all the bodies for Renault and Peugeot. And they had a project with one of the two automakers to design and build a sports car in Paris. And well, luckily I was hired to do that. So we alternated over several months, meetings one week a month between Detroit and Paris. I ate very well in Paris, by the way. But that was my first exposure to the auto industry and to the appreciation for how global and international it is. So I think, and certainly in those days, we had the Iron Curtain. You couldn't trade really with what's now Russia, the Eastern European countries, or Ukraine, which Chris has talked about, or China. So that's opened up huge opportunities for international legal work in lots of areas. So if your thing is intellectual property, you're going to be doing international work. It's just, you're going to be doing international trademarks. You're going to be dealing with copyright. Your client, if they have a patent, they're going to want to have it protected, not just in the United States, but all over the place. Immigration, Chris mentioned, obviously, but tax, there's international tax issues, banking, M&A, even estate planning. I can think of one Japanese client who was transferred from Japan to work here in Michigan. He unfortunately died here in Michigan, and because he did not have, estate planning documentation, wound up having his estate probated here in Michigan, not in Japan. So even if you're an estate planning lawyer, there's opportunity there to deal with planning. But just to wrap up, I'd say, just as Chris mentioned, just continue to learn, follow your interests, and I think in this rapidly changing world, you're going to find lots of opportunities. Turn it back to you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Absolutely fascinating. Eve.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me this time? Oh, good. Okay, I'm delighted. Well, thank you, Greg, and thanks to the entire group. It's always a pleasure to join International Law Section events, and I'm really happy to be able to address students with some background in terms of my own work, experience, and suggestions on how to pursue something like what I'm doing if that's of interest to you. So I am a senior international trade specialist within the U.S. Department of Commerce. And within the Department of Commerce, there are a total of 13 bureaus. One of those is the International Trade Administration. And within ITA, I work for the U.S. Commercial Service. So we are basically the export promotion arm of the U.S. government. And we work directly with companies to help them interface with our colleagues all over the world in U.S. embassies and consulates in approximately 80 countries. So in those foreign offices, I have two types of colleagues. there are American career foreign service officers, and there are also local hires that we call commercial specialists who are natives of the countries where they work. And basically, together, we offer sort of business consulting with our government hats on. So I don't actually provide legal advice, although I do keep my eyes open for legal issues and help point those out to companies and, provide them advice in terms of resources. So examples of the kind of work I do, we help companies find business partners overseas. So matchmaking, both in person and virtually now with the pandemic. And we will help companies here in the United States find new agents or distributors overseas, new joint venture partners or licensees if they're interested in licensing technology. We also help vet potential business partners overseas or potential customers and solve problems that might create hurdles to export sales of US goods and services. We also advocate on behalf of US companies that are seeking to sell to foreign governments. So we actually have a special advocacy center in Washington that works with our colleagues in overseas offices. And if there's a US company that is bidding on a project with a foreign government, our advocacy center will get involved and help make the case in front of the foreign government for why they should consider using the US service or product provider. We work closely with partners. So here in Michigan, our closest relationship, and really a very deep and fruitful one, is with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. MEDC has an international trade office, and together we jointly provide a variety of different services to companies here. We also work with industry associations, economic development organizations, local governments, county governments, etc. When legal issues come up, although I still am a member of the state bar and a member of the council of the International Law Section, I don't actually give advice on those legal issues. So I do direct companies to resources to get help to address them. So the types of legal issues that come up are things like a company might be drafting a new agreement with a business partner and need advice on that agreement, complying with US export regulations, protecting IP, which is of course incredibly important. And sometimes I think companies overlook that. They might think that they have patents or trademarks in the US and aren't even aware sometimes that those are not going to be effective in other countries. And also helping companies address trade barriers. So we were asked to talk a little bit about the path that we took to get to where we are in terms of career. And I'll just give you a little bit of background. So I'm actually a Detroit native. So I graduated from Detroit public schools, including Cass Technical High School, proud to be a graduate of Cass Tech. And I actually started as a music major. I was a trumpet performance major, but ultimately switched majors and graduated with a BA in history from Wayne State University in Detroit. I went to University of Michigan for my law degree, and then overseas did an LLM in comparative European and international law at the European University in Florence, Italy. So I did a variety of things. I spent a total of 7 years overseas. Amongst those, I worked as an associate for what is now White & Case's Brussels office. So I was there for 4 years before returning to Michigan. I did 1 year working in-house counsel, where I realized that I actually enjoyed the business side as much as I enjoyed working on the legal side of international trade. And so 21 years ago, I joined the US Commercial Service here in Michigan. And I did consider at one point switching to the overseas side of our organization. There's a kind of an in-depth process, to apply for those foreign service jobs. And I was on a list waiting for assignment when, for family reasons, I realized that I would need to stay in the US. So I have no regrets about that. I still absolutely enjoy my work. I've been doing my job now for 21 years, which is hard to believe. But every single day I am in contact with colleagues all over the world. And the pandemic has actually brought us closer in the sense that whereas we used to have, phone conferences, now these are often video conferences, and I can actually put faces with names and voices of people that I've worked with for years, but perhaps had never met. So moving on from there, some suggestions on how to prepare for a position if you're interested in government. So my own position, is, as I mentioned, I have a law degree and actually an LLM, but a background in business would really be essential if you were interested in working for the U.S. Commercial Service. So if you studied business as an undergrad, that's absolutely great. If not, you'll need to find a way to gain experience either via work or additional studies. Languages are extremely helpful, especially if you want to apply for overseas positions. Internships are a great way to get a background and experience. So our offices in the US and overseas often will host interns. The state trade offices around the country also offer opportunities either for internships or permanent positions. And there are, of course, trade associations that are involved with international trade, as well as private sector businesses. So I would really focus on trying to get experience in international business. A graduate degree is very helpful. So if you have an undergrad degree in business plus a JD, and you've taken international law courses, that will be very, very useful. Other ways to establish your international credentials include student organizations, articles you might publish, research you might do, internships, summer jobs. The main way to find out about opportunities in government is really to look on the USA Jobs website. And I would encourage you all to take a look at that website. You can search via just the word international. Then you can try adding international plus the word lawyer. And you can also do searches for intern or pathways intern. The key at the end of the day, though, is always networking. So, think about folks that that you can have conversations with to learn more and just get ideas. So I hope this has been helpful, and I will turn it back to Greg, and happy to take questions later on.
Thank you so much, Eve. That's extremely helpful. Before I open to the questions, I thought I might just spend a moment and just provide a little bit more information on a couple of things that Chris mentioned, which I thought were absolutely fascinating. Chris, you mentioned that you had taken an international human rights course abroad and were able to get credit for that. Any law student in the United States can take a summer program abroad that is run by an American law school and get credit. There are a whole lot of requirements that the ABA has to make sure that those credits are available and transfer. The opportunities are basically unlimited. You can find a course on almost any topic, almost anywhere in the world. The ABA website has a very comprehensive list. They're staffed primarily by law professors from the American law school that sponsors the program. So that is a really wonderful way to be abroad, to study an international topic, and also get credit for it towards your JD. Chris also mentioned the International Law Association. There's an American branch of the International Law Association. They work on a whole variety of interesting issues. They put on interesting events. There's an event in New York in the fall each year, which I think has already happened, called the International Law Weekend. I've spoken on panels there. It's great. And then one more organization just to plug, because I've done a lot of work with them, is the American Society of International Law. It's I think maybe the largest international law organization in the world, although maybe the International Law Association gives them a run for their money. They publish the American Journal of International Law. They hold an annual meeting every year. They hold regional meetings all over the place. And the good thing about ASIL is that student memberships are very inexpensive. I think it's $50 a year, and you get access to a whole lot of stuff. So Eve mentioned networking, and those are just some opportunities I'd throw out that would be available for folks. Okay, well, let's move to questions. If there are people in the chat, I'm sorry, who are on Zoom who would like to ask questions, please just say you'd like to ask a question and we'll recognize you. We also have folks live here, and if anybody, would anybody here like to ask a question? Okay, I'm gonna go hand the microphone over.
This is kind of a question for anyone, but how has like Brexit impacted each of your positions? I know it's been disruptive just to my own personal life, so I can only imagine the impact that it's had for all of you doing international law, especially in a business setting. So I'm just curious kind of how that's played out with Brexit.
Was the question how the pandemic has impacted our work? Is that what I heard?
No, I'm sorry. Let me repeat. Yeah, the question was how Brexit has impacted your work and the issues that you see. Thank you very much. Brexit, the British exit from the EU.
Okay, thank you.
If anybody would like to take that.
Well, I haven't experienced any challenges with respect to Brexit so far, so I'll defer to my other panelists.
So in my case, you know, obviously when companies consider going to Europe, you know, in the past, I think a lot of American companies would have viewed the UK as a good launching point, just because of the comfort of, you know, common language, et cetera. But, you know, I think that they need to have kind of a two-part strategy now, you know, one strategy for the UK and a separate strategy for the EU. So I think that's probably the main impact directly on clients that I work with.
I can add a comment as well. I'm on the board of the British American Business Council, and it's been disappointing that, you know, there hasn't been more movement toward a free trade agreement between the United States and Britain. But as Eve mentioned, I've advised clients on setting up in the UK as an easy entry point, and you know, it's been many years. It's been relatively attractive from a tax standpoint. A lot of those companies now that may have set up there are maybe moving over to Ireland, which is a, you know, an EU country and gives them the advantage there. So it just shows the world's always changing. So, you know, we have to be adept and ready to make changes along with it as lawyers.
Thank you. There are a couple of people who have posted questions in the chat, and if you would like to ask those questions yourself, you're more than welcome to do it. I see Caso, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a question in the chat. Would you like to amplify on that?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Actually, I just want to know, because I'm a PhD student and my subject is all about the private international law, and I just want to know if there is any way to recruit students to work for international, to engage with the private international law issue within this, within your institution.
I'm sorry.
My background, there's a lot of noise. That's why I wouldn't be able to talk clearly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just want to know if there's any way to recruit student or academic researcher in that field.
Well, I think I'll let folks answer. I mean, you know, if you're looking for employment in a private firm or a company, you know, each firm has its own, you know, recruiting strategy, and the recruiting season usually starts in early August. But I think you could find out information from particular firm websites, particular company websites.
How about as an unpaid job? I mean, like just as a volunteer or work as a volunteer. or unpaid job, or to train students in that way?
Well, I think Eve mentioned the USA Jobs website, which Eve, you may know more about this than I do,
Sure.
but they do list internships that are unpaid. And so that would be another place to look.
Yeah, actually, some of our internships are
Thank you.
some of them are actually paid internships, but I should mention that to intern in one of our offices in the United States, it's actually a requirement that number one, you are currently a student, and number two, you have to be a US citizen. But we do offer internships in some of our overseas offices. And for some of those internships, you might not need to be a US citizen. Often these are posted on the websites for those overseas offices. So you would just need to take a look at those. These are not, some of these unpaid internships might not necessarily show up on USA Jobs. They might be on the Commercial Service Office's public-facing website under the intern button. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's another question from Isaac Curry. Isaac, would you like to ask that question personally, or would you like to just?
Yes. Thank you. My name is Isaac Corey. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so a little bit of a rivalry. I study international relations and law here in Warsaw, Poland. Apart from networking, this is open to the entire panel. What would be a few ways to strive in the international law field as a student, still in my bachelor's degree, whether it's doing work with NGOs and private law firms, or if it's better to do work with government bodies, such as the International Criminal Court?
I personally think both can be very useful. And I think I would reflect on the question of whether you're more interested in doing international legal work related to the private sector, to business, or more interested in public sector. And then I would direct your efforts in one or the other direction, depending on which you're more interested in.
Isaac, I just so happened at MSU Law, or after I graduated, I've been active in the Alumni Association. I served in the Alumni Board as Alumni Engagement Director, and MSU Law has had a relationship with the University of Białystok in Poland for the last 10 years, and we opened up a local chapter of alumni. And I'd be happy to make introductions for you for some of the people. How far is Białystok from Warsaw? Do you know? Is it
I think it's a few hours, but
okay.
Public transportation is very easy here.
Well, I do have some contacts in your age group, and I'd be happy to make introductions. Just connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy. That'd be a good start. I've been using LinkedIn has been a really essential part of my networking and marketing strategy since 2008. And so reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll make some introductions electronically to some of my younger colleagues in your age group. And I think that'll be helpful to see what they do. You can compare notes and so on.
Definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You might also want to look and see whether there are any US law firms that have offices in country and get in touch with them. I think they might be interested.
I can second that. I mean, my firm opened one of the very first foreign offices in Warsaw. I spent a fair bit of time over there, actually, but this is almost 30 years ago now. But yeah, there's a lot of foreign law offices, in Warsaw, and I think that'd be a good place for you to make some contact and just see what kind of connections might evolve from it.
Great. Thank you. Are there other questions from folks here at Wayne? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands. Liz, you had a question that you put in the chat?
You've had so many wonderful questions. I did. I just put that in there quickly. Thank you so much for everything. You mentioned the Foreign Service exam, Eve, and I think Chris, your work in international arbitration law, and Bruce, thank you. If any of you want to comment on any international standard tests like the Foreign Service exam that you might recommend?
Yeah. So why don't I start with the question of foreign service? So
Okay.
in the US, there are sort of two categories, at least two categories of foreign service. And one would be with the State Department, which is more focused on politics, state to state relations. And then the second is the US Department of Commerce, where I work. And so it's not something you can just kind of raise your hand and say, at least in the Department of Commerce, which is what I'm more familiar with. You can't just raise your hand and say, I'd like to take the test. You would need to apply when they open the process, which is not always open. So depending on when they feel like they need to make new hires, they will open that process. Then you would apply. And if you get selected to move further in the application, you might be invited to come to Washington and do the next steps in the process. So on the State Department side, I'm really not familiar with it because I haven't done that process. But I'm sure it would be possible just to look on the State Department website and read up on how that works.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Liz. As far as becoming an international arbitration judge, with the tribunals I worked with, and these were like 15 and 16 years ago, usually by agreement in the bilateral investment treaty, there'd be the respondent would pick one. It would be 3 arbitrators, and they were taken from a pool of people in legal academia and legal practice. They had a pool of their own. I really don't know how one becomes an arbitrator and be on their list, but the claimant would choose one, the respondent would choose one, and then the tribunal itself would choose the third. So there was really that's how it worked. But in order to defend, my New York admission was qualified me to take part. We were defending Ukraine against claims of expropriation of investment under bilateral investment treaties. And so I really don't know how one becomes an arbitrator. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but that's basically it. To be a practitioner participating in it, you need to be admitted somewhere. In my case, my New York admission was sufficient.
I could maybe just add on something that kind of follows on from, can folks hear me? Yeah, follows on from what Eve said, kind of talking about the State Department having its own process. I think it's fair to say, although I haven't done a complete survey, that almost every federal agency has an office, and those offices have lawyers that deal with international issues. I mean, it's absolutely true for the Justice Department, but true for the Agriculture Department or the Energy Department or the Department of Education. The United States has global interests and there are always lawyers, within those agencies who have to address the legal questions that arise from those global interests. So, Eve's employer and the State Department are kind of the obvious, entities that deal with international issues. But I would encourage you to look broadly to kind of every part of the federal government, and also, the state governments. Eve mentioned the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I don't know if they have lawyers working for them, but they're the entity that helps promote Michigan abroad and helps bring foreign investors to Michigan.
Hey, Greg, it's Elliott Church here. May I break in for a minute?
Absolutely.
I want to break in because we're approaching the top of the hour, which is the end of our allotted time. And I want to thank everyone on behalf of the International Law Section for attending this very informative panel discussion. And thanks to the panelists for providing lots of interesting information about your backgrounds, potential paths, how to network, precisely who to contact in order to create your own personal network and trade organizations. I think this is of real value. Greg, I'll also thank you for interjecting a lot of important supplemental points. I want to give Liz Storm a moment to talk about the International Law Section's mentorship program. What I've heard a lot of is that guidance is important and that network is important. And one of those important networking contacts for every student should be a mentor who can respond outside of a a dedicated session like this, but can respond on an ad hoc and an as needed basis to questions about what do I do next. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz to describe that program, and then everyone is dismissed if you need to go. But if you want to continue the conversation, please hang on the line, and we'll hand it back over to Greg. Liz?
Thank you, and thank you, Greg, and all the panelists for participating today, and all of you for your questions and showing up on this virtual networking program for the International Law Section Mentor Program. This is going to be a new challenge for all of us to facilitate mentor relationships and create awareness about career options in the field of international law. But we will be sending out a link to the State Bar of Michigan Mentoring Center and how to select whether you want to be a mentee or a mentor. LinkedIn, as Chris mentioned, is a great way to reach out to some of the panelists, but we will try and keep this going to develop more networking opportunities like this, where you'll hear from experts in the area, and we can identify experienced practitioners through your participation. So if you don't get the email, please make sure to follow up. You should get it in the next week or so. But and if you have any questions, email Elliott Church or myself. And I really appreciate everybody for participating today. Elliott, did I cover everything?
Yeah, sounds good. You also mentioned at the top of the hour that the mentorship program is being promoted and facilitated by certain academic partners in Michigan who you have taken the effort to reach out to and integrate into the mentorship program. And they are...
No, thank you. We want to match students with new attorneys and mentors. We really appreciate all the law schools in the state of Michigan for participating, especially Wayne State University Law School for without their location here today, and everybody. Greg Fox, thank you for letting us use your auditorium today. Otherwise, we would all be in there today, but for the pandemic. Western Michigan University Cooley Law School, Detroit Mercy Law School, and of course, Michigan State University College of Law. Chris Giles is an alumni there as well as I am, and I appreciate his participation today. If you are at any of those schools, your alumni career services provider will be a liaison on this committee, and we really encourage you to participate with the academic liaison that'll be participating from your schools. So thank you for bringing that up, Elliott.
So with that, Greg, we'll turn it over to you to continue the discussion. Thanks all for attending. If you weren't able to see some parts of this, it will be recorded. A link will be distributed by you, Liz, to all participants. But Greg, please feel free to carry on or bring this to a close as you prefer.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the folks live here? Who are significantly fewer than there were a few minutes ago. Doesn't look like that.
Greg, one thing, I hope you can hear me with the video and everything, the connection. Yes. Thank you so much again. Anybody that registered that's in the auditorium, we'd like to follow up. I don't know that they registered on Zoom, but we'll need that contact information.
Okay, yeah, I hope people registered, and if you did, you will get links and the video recording of this this session.
Yes, I'd like to make sure that you can get that to whoever's in the auditorium. That would be great. It'll be a recording of the session and then also a link to participate in the mentor program for 2022.
Wonderful. Well, I think then that I can call the session to a close and thank Chris, thank Eve, thank Bruce for really wonderful presentations and descriptions of your path to where you are, and I think that makes it somewhat clearer to law students who probably don't often get this sort of insight. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Well, I'll hang on the line in case anyone has questions about the International Law Section or any other matter. But thanks Thank you again, and have a great day all.
Okay.